The moment my father announced that my younger brother would inherit the family group, everyone in the room looked at me. They were waiting for me to object. I didn't. Instead, I lowered my eyes, lifted the teacup in front of me, and said quietly, "Congratulations, Adrian." My father's expression tightened. "You're not going to fight this?" "No." My mother stared at me as if I had suddenly become a stranger. My brother Adrian, who had spent the last 3 years calling me his biggest supporter, smiled with visible relief. "Ethan, I knew you'd understand." I smiled back. That was the first time I realized something important. In my previous life, I had spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, and loved my family enough, they would eventually see my worth. This time I knew better, because I had already watched everything they built collapse, and I knew exactly who would be standing in the ruins. 3 days earlier, I had opened my eyes to the sound of rain against my bedroom window. For several minutes, I simply stared at the ceiling. The room was familiar. Too familiar. The old wooden bookshelf, the blue curtains my mother had chosen, the framed photograph of my parents beside my graduation certificate. Then I saw the calendar. March 8th, 22 years old. My breath stopped. I had returned to the year when my grandfather was still alive, when our company had not yet expanded overseas, and when my father had not yet decided which son would become his successor. In my previous life, I had become the obvious choice. I had studied finance, rebuilt our failing logistics division, negotiated our largest international contract, and spent years protecting the family company from bad investments. I thought that meant I belonged at the center of the family. I was wrong. Adrian had been my younger brother, charming, reckless, and brilliant at making people like him. He hated numbers, but loved appearances. He couldn't manage a warehouse without losing money, yet my father adored his confidence. Back then, I had constantly defended Adrian. When he lost millions on a failed technology investment, I secretly covered the debt. When he forged my signature to secure another loan, I convinced the board it had been my mistake. And when my father eventually gave Adrian control of the company, I stayed. I told myself family came first. That decision cost me everything. I remembered the final night of my previous life. Our headquarters had been seized. Employees were leaving. Creditors were waiting outside. My father was hospitalized after a stroke. My mother blamed me for the collapse. And Adrian? He had disappeared with the remaining company funds. I had stood alone in the empty executive office, staring at the city lights through cracked glass. Then I found a final document, a transfer agreement. Adrian had sold our most valuable subsidiary months earlier. The buyer was a company secretly controlled by him. He hadn't merely failed. He had planned to take everything. I remembered laughing that night, not because anything was funny, because I finally understood. I'd spent my entire life trying to protect people who had never protected me. Then the office door opened. Adrian walked in. "You always were too stubborn," he said. I had turned toward him. "You betrayed all of us." He shrugged. "No, I chose myself." Those were the last words I heard before everything went black. And now, I was 22 again, alive, healthy, with 20 years of knowledge trapped inside my head. So when my father announced that Adrian would receive the family crown, I didn't fight. Why would I? I already knew where that road ended. But there was one thing none of them knew. Before I died in my previous life, I had discovered a company called North Star Dynamics. It was a tiny engineering firm no one in our family cared about. I had studied its patents while searching for investments. One of them had seemed insignificant at the time, a new energy storage system. I remembered what happened later. North Star's technology became one of the most valuable industrial breakthroughs of the decade. And this time, I knew exactly when its founder would need funding. I had no intention of telling my family. Not yet. First, I had to disappear from their expectations. My father cleared his throat. "Ethan, your silence is surprising. I've thought about it." And I looked at Adrian. "You're making the right choice, Dad." Adrian's smile widened. My mother sighed with relief. For the first time, I saw their shoulders relax because they believed I had accepted my place. They didn't realize I was accepting something else. Freedom. That evening, Adrian came to my room. He closed the door behind him. "You really aren't angry?" "No. You worked harder than anyone." "I know." He laughed awkwardly. Then maybe this is for the best. You were never good at politics anyway. I almost smiled. In my previous life, those words would have hurt. Now, they sounded like permission. Permission to stop proving myself. You're right, I said. I'm not. Adrian looked satisfied. Good. I knew you would support me. After he left, I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a small leather notebook. I had bought it during my first life when I was 22. This time, I had purchased the same notebook that morning. I wrote 3 names on the first page. My father's, my mother's, Adrian's. Then beneath them, I wrote, I will not compete with you. I turned the page. I will build something you cannot take from me. And for the first time since waking up, I felt completely calm. 2 weeks later, I resigned from the family company. My father nearly dropped his pen. What did you say? I want to leave. You're joking. No. He stared at the resignation letter on his desk. You're 22. I know. You have no independent business experience. I know. You're throwing away your future. I looked at him quietly. No, Dad. I'm choosing it. His face hardened. Is this because Adrian is becoming successor? No. Then why? Because I knew what would happen. Because I had already watched this company die. Because staying would mean spending another lifetime trying to earn a position I no longer wanted. But I couldn't tell him that. So I simply said, I want to build something of my own. He laughed. Not cruelly. Almost sadly. Ethan, our family has spent decades building this company. You think you can walk outside and build something better? I don't know. That answer surprised him. Then I added, but I want to find out. My mother cried when she heard. She came to my apartment that night. You're angry with us. No, you don't have to pretend. I'm not pretending. She sat beside me. Your father thinks you're being impulsive. He has the right to think that. And Adrian says you feel betrayed. I looked at her. Do I? She waited. I shook my head. I'm just tired. That was the truth. Not tired from work. Tired from being the person everyone expected to sacrifice. My mother reached for my hand. Come home when you calm down. I squeezed her fingers gently. I'll visit. She smiled, believing that meant I would return. I didn't correct her. The next morning, I moved into a tiny rented office above a repair shop. It had 2 desks, 1 broken air conditioner, and a window overlooking a crowded street. I loved it. No portraits of ancestors. No board members. No family name hanging over the door. Just an empty room. For the first time, every decision belonged to me. My first move was not glamorous. I spent 6 weeks contacting engineers, investors, and small manufacturers. Most ignored me. Some laughed. One investor actually asked, why would I trust a 22-year-old with no reputation? I smiled. You shouldn't. He blinked. Then why are you here? Because I only need one person to believe in the technology. I placed North Star Dynamics research proposal on his desk. He barely looked at it. Energy storage? Too expensive. It won't stay expensive. How do you know? I paused. Because I had seen the future. Instead, I said, because the manufacturing process is about to change. He rejected me. So did 4 others. The 6th meeting lasted 8 minutes. The 7th lasted 20. The 8th ended with an investor asking me to send the technical documents. That was the first crack in the wall. I used everything I remembered. Not to copy the future. To prepare for it. I knew which suppliers would collapse. Which materials would become scarce. Which patents would matter. Which small companies would be ignored until their value multiplied. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I still had to work. I spent nights studying engineering papers. Days negotiating contracts. Weekends visiting factories. My hands became rough. My suits became cheap. My sleep disappeared. And somehow, I was happier than I had ever been. Meanwhile, my family company was celebrating Adrian's promotion. Pictures appeared online. Adrian standing beside my father. Adrian shaking hands with directors. Adrian giving interviews about the company's new generation. One headline read, "A new heir, a new era." I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't feel jealous. That frightened me more than anger would have. Because once, that headline would have destroyed me. Now it meant nothing. 3 months later, something unexpected happened. North Star's founder called me personally. His voice was shaking. Mr. Hale, we received the first prototype results. I sat upright. And Silence. Then he laughed. It works. My heart started pounding. Are you certain? We repeated the test 11 times. I closed my eyes. For the first time, I allowed myself to smile. The future had changed, but the door I remembered was still opening. I immediately called my small team together. We don't have time to celebrate. They looked at me. The market is going to move faster than we expect. One engineer frowned. How do you know? I looked at the prototype sitting beneath the fluorescent lights. Because once people realize what this can do, everyone will want it. What I didn't know was that someone else was already watching us. Someone from my family. Someone who had finally begun wondering why the son they thought had walked away was suddenly becoming impossible to find. The first time Adrian heard my company's name, he laughed. The second time, he stopped laughing. It happened at a private dinner my father hosted for several senior executives. I wasn't there. I had deliberately avoided every family event since leaving the company. But Adrian had invited a group of investors, and one of them mentioned North Star Dynamics. Have you heard of a young investor named Ethan Hale? The man asked. Adrian's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Ethan? Yes. He has been quietly acquiring stakes in several small industrial firms. My father looked up. How small? Small enough that nobody cared 6 months ago. The investor smiled. But that may be changing. Adrian leaned back. What is he doing? Energy storage, manufacturing, logistics automation. He's putting together an unusual portfolio. My father frowned. That doesn't sound like Ethan. Adrian gave a dismissive laugh. He probably got lucky. Nobody answered. The investor simply continued eating. That silence bothered Adrian more than an argument would have. Later that night, he called me. I watched his name appear on my phone. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. In my previous life, I would have answered immediately. This time, I let it ring. It stopped, then rang again. I ignored it. A message arrived. We need to talk. I put the phone face down. My business partner, Mira Chun, glanced at me. Family? Yes. Want me to leave? No. She smiled. Then don't let them ruin your evening. Mira had joined me 4 months earlier. She was a former operations manager who had been pushed out of a major manufacturing company after refusing to approve fraudulent safety reports. She understood something about me that my family never had. I wasn't obsessed with winning. I was obsessed with building something that worked. That night, she handed me a folder. The new factory lease is ready. I opened it. We're signing tomorrow. She nodded. You're sure? Yes. This is our biggest commitment yet. I looked around our tiny office. We can't stay small forever. Mira studied me. You're different when you talk about this. Ow! Like you finally found something you were looking for. I smiled. Maybe I did. The factory was old. The roof leaked. Half the machinery needed replacing. But it was ours. And within 6 months, North Star's battery system went from a promising prototype to a commercially viable product. Then the first major order arrived. A regional transportation company wanted to test our technology in a fleet of electric delivery vehicles. The contract wasn't enormous, but it was proof. The following week, another company called. Then another. Investors who had ignored me began sending emails. Some apologized. Others pretended they had believed in us from the beginning. I didn't care. I remembered every rejection. Not because I wanted revenge, because rejection had taught me to stop depending on approval. Meanwhile, my family's company was entering dangerous territory. Adrian had begun making aggressive acquisitions. He wanted to prove himself. My father encouraged him. You need to think bigger, he told him. Adrian listened. He bought a struggling logistics company at an inflated price. Then another. The board raised concerns. Adrian dismissed them. We're expanding. My father defended him. He's thinking long-term. I knew exactly what that meant. In my previous life, those acquisitions had been the first stones in the road toward disaster. But this time, I wasn't there to stop them. And that was the hardest part. I could have warned my father. One phone call. One message. I could have saved millions. For several nights, I thought about it. Then I remembered the final night of my previous life. My father had looked at me across that ruined office. You were supposed to protect us. I had protected them until there was nothing left of me. So this time I stayed silent. Not because I wanted them to suffer, because I finally understood that their choices belonged to them. One afternoon, my mother unexpectedly appeared at my factory. I froze when I saw her. She looked around at the workers moving between machines. "You built this?" "Yes." She touched one of the metal panels. "It feels real." I laughed softly. "It is." She smiled. "You look thinner." "Busy." "Are you eating?" "Sometimes." She sighed. For a moment, she looked exactly like the mother I remembered from childhood. The woman who used to sit beside my bed when I was sick. The woman who once sold an expensive bracelet to pay for my university tuition. A memory surfaced. I was 17. I'd failed an important exam. I had sat on the kitchen floor, convinced I'd disappointed everyone. My mother had knelt beside me and said, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved." I had believed her. That memory hurt now, because somewhere along the way, love had become conditional. My mother looked at me. "Your father wants you back." I shook my head. "I'm not going back." "Not even to help?" "No." Her eyes filled with disappointment. "You're still angry." I looked at her for a long time. "No, Mom." I took a breath. "I'm finally not." She didn't understand. Maybe she couldn't. Before she left, she whispered, "Your father says the company needs you." I smiled sadly. Then he should have treated me like someone they needed. She lowered her eyes. And for the first time, she had no answer. 3 weeks later, the family company suffered its first major loss. Adrian's new logistics acquisition had hidden liabilities. Millions disappeared almost overnight. The board demanded an explanation. Adrian blamed the previous owners, then the accounting department, then market conditions. My father defended him, but confidence was beginning to crack. I learned about it from a former employee who had joined my company. He came into my office late one evening. "Ethan, you should know something." I looked up from my computer. "What?" "Your brother asked about you." I leaned back. "What did he ask?" "He wanted to know whether North Star was connected to you." I smiled. "Why?" "He thinks you're competing against the family." I shook my head. "I'm not competing with anyone." The employee hesitated. "Your family doesn't see it that way." That was becoming their problem, not mine. A month later, our company secured a contract with one of the largest public transportation manufacturers in the region. The news spread quickly. North Star was no longer a small startup. We were becoming a serious player. An industry magazine published an article titled, "The Young Founder Betting on Energy Independence." The article didn't reveal much about me. That was intentional. I preferred the company to be known before I was. But my family recognized my photograph. Adrian called me immediately. This time I answered, "Hello." There was a long silence. "You've been busy." "Yes." "You're becoming famous." "Not really." He laughed. "You always did hate attention." "I still do." His voice changed. "You could have done this with us." I looked out the window. "No." "Why?" "Because you would have taken credit. Because Dad would have called it a family achievement. Because eventually you would have asked me to sacrifice everything again." Instead, I said, "I wanted something of my own." "You think you're better than us now?" "No." My answer came so quickly that he fell silent. "I just don't think about you as much as you think about me." He hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. That night, Mira found me still working. "You should go home." "This is my home." She shook her head. "No, this is your company." I looked at her. "There's a difference." She sat across from me. "You know, you don't have to spend your whole life proving that leaving was the right decision." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes people build enormous things because they're trying to make someone regret losing them." I didn't answer, because she was right. That possibility frightened me. Was I really building for myself? Or was some part of me still standing in that ruined office, waiting for my family to realize what they had thrown away? I closed the laptop. "You're right." Mira smiled. "Good. I'll work harder tomorrow." She laughed. "That wasn't what I meant." For the first time in years, I laughed too. The next morning, I made a decision. I stopped checking financial news about my family's company. I stopped asking former employees what Adrian was doing. I stopped reading messages from relatives who want to gossip. I had spent enough of my second chance looking backward. Then North Star received an invitation. A European energy consortium wanted to meet us. The meeting could transform our company. Mira read the letter twice. "This is huge." "Yes." "Do you know what happens if they invest?" "We expand internationally." She grinned. And if they don't, we keep going. She nodded. That's the answer I wanted. 2 weeks later, we flew overseas. The negotiations lasted 9 days. There were arguments over patents, manufacturing rights, distribution, control. At one point, the consortium offered me a huge amount of money for the company. I refused. The lead negotiator stared at me. You understand what you're turning down? Yes. Why? I thought about my old life, my family, the crown I had once fought for, the company that had owned every decision I made. Then I looked at the contract. I don't want to sell the thing I spent my life trying to build. We eventually signed a partnership instead. When I returned home, North Star's valuation had multiplied. But the most important change wasn't financial. I had finally stopped measuring my life against my family's. Then, one morning, my assistant entered my office with an envelope. Mr. Hale, this arrived personally. I opened it. Inside was a letter from my father. Only 3 sentences. Ethan, we need to talk. Not about the company. About what happened years ago. I stared at those words. Because I knew what years ago meant. And suddenly, the calm I had built began to crack. I read my father's letter 3 times before putting it back into the envelope. I didn't call him. Instead, I drove to the old family house. Not because I wanted to return, because there were some wounds you couldn't close without finally looking at them. My father was waiting in the study. He looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired. On the table between us sat a cardboard box. I stopped when I saw it. What is that? Things your grandfather left behind. I frowned. Why are you showing me this now? My father didn't answer immediately. He opened the box. Inside were old photographs, letters, company records, and a small brass key. I recognized the key. It belonged to my grandfather's private archive. He had once told me, when I was 16, one day, Ethan, you'll understand why a family business is never really about money. At the time, I had laughed. I thought he was being sentimental. My father picked up an old envelope. This was written shortly before your grandfather died. To whom? To you. My chest tightened. Why didn't I receive it? My father looked away. Because I thought you were too young. I opened the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan, if you're reading this, you've probably begun to understand that our family's greatest weakness isn't competition. It's the belief that blood automatically creates loyalty. I stopped. My father said quietly, "Keep reading." The letter explained that my grandfather had created a separate trust. Not for my father. Not for Adrian. For me. It contained shares in several dormant companies and, more importantly, a collection of patents and investment rights my grandfather had acquired decades earlier. But there was a condition. The trust would only become active when I reached 25. I stared at my father. You knew? Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? His jaw tightened. Because I believed giving you too much power too young would destroy your relationship with your brother. I almost laughed. You protected our relationship by hiding my inheritance. I made a mistake. No. I looked at the letter again. You made a choice. He lowered his head. That distinction mattered. Because mistakes were accidental. Choices were deliberate. My grandfather's final pages contained something else. A name. North Star Dynamics. I froze. The company I had discovered in my previous life. The company whose technology had become the foundation of my new empire. My grandfather had invested in North Star decades earlier. Not because of its battery technology. Because he believed the founder's research would eventually become important. The trust contained an old controlling stake. I looked at my father. You knew North Star existed? Yes. And you never told me? You were focused on the family group. My hands tightened around the letter. Everything suddenly made sense. My grandfather had seen potential in places my father ignored. I had stumbled on a North Star in my previous life. This time, I had found it intentionally. But now I understood something deeper. I hadn't accidentally built my future. My grandfather had left me the tools. I simply had to choose whether to use them. My father leaned forward. Ethan, I want you to come back. I closed the letter. No. He looked hurt. Why? Because you aren't asking me to come back as your son. He didn't respond. You're asking me to come back because the company is in trouble. That isn't fair, isn't it? He looked down. I continued softly. You chose Adrian. I accepted that. But when things became difficult, Suddenly you remembered what I could do. He closed his eyes. I was wrong. I know. The word surprised him. You know? Yes. I stood. I don't need you to admit it anymore. He looked at me. Then what do you need? I thought about it. Nothing. That hurt him more than anger could have. Before leaving, I placed the letter back on the table. I don't want to trust either. He stared at me. You're refusing your grandfather's inheritance? No. I smiled faintly. I'll accept what he intended for me. But I just won't use it to rebuild your company. I walked toward the door. My father called after me. Ethan. I stopped. Your grandfather would be proud of you. I didn't turn around. I hope so. Outside, the evening air felt strangely light. But the revelation followed me for weeks. North Star was partially mine, not because of my family, because my grandfather had believed in its future. That distinction mattered. I brought the documents to Mira. She read them in silence. And she looked at me. Do you realize what this means? Yes. You could control North Star completely. Eventually, she smiled. And you're still calm? I've learned something. What? Power isn't valuable because other people recognize it. She nodded. It matters because you know what to do with it. I looked at the old documents. For the first time, I understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach me. A crown was not ownership. It was responsibility. And I no longer wanted the crown my family offered. I wanted to build something worthy of carrying. The next year changed everything. North Star expanded into 3 countries. Our battery technology was licensed to transportation companies, industrial manufacturers, and renewable energy firms. Our revenue grew faster than even I had expected, but I refused to move into a giant headquarters. We stayed practical. Every new employee received stock options. Every engineer who improved the technology received a bonus. Mira became Chief Operating Officer, and I finally stopped introducing myself as the founder. I was simply Ethan. Then the family company made a mistake that could no longer be hidden. Adrian had taken out enormous loans to finance his acquisitions. When interest rates rose, the debt became impossible to service. Banks demanded repayment. The board panicked. My father tried to stabilize the company, but the damage was too deep. I watched from distance, not with satisfaction, with sadness. One evening, Mira entered my office. The Hale Group wants a meeting. I didn't look up. Why? They want North Star to acquire their logistics division. I stopped writing. They're selling? Not exactly. She placed a document in front of me. They're asking you to save it. I stared at the proposal. This was the moment I had once imagined. The family company needed me. The son they had rejected had become the only person capable of rescuing them. Part of me wanted to say yes. Not for revenge. For my father. For my mother. For the employees who had never betrayed me. But another part remembered something my grandfather had written. Never rescue a person by becoming trapped in the same fire. I closed the folder. No. Mira nodded. I thought you'd say that. Did they offer anything? Your father offered you control. I laughed softly. Of course he did. That evening, I received another call. It was Adrian. His voice was different. No arrogance. No confidence. Just exhaustion. Ethan. Adrian. I need your help. I said nothing. He continued. The board is preparing to remove me. I leaned back. That sounds serious. It is. You'll survive. Will I? There was a long silence. Then he asked the question I had been expecting for years. Do you hate me? I closed my eyes. A memory came back. We were children. Adrian was 8. I was 12. He had fallen off his bicycle and scraped his knee. He had cried so hard that he couldn't breathe. I had carried him home on my back. He'd whispered, "Don't tell Mom." I had laughed. Why? Because she'll make me stop writing. I had promised. For years, I thought that memory proved we were brothers. Now I realized it proved something else. I had loved him. Maybe he had loved me too. Until ambition changed what love meant to him. No, I finally said, I don't hate you. His breathing changed. Then help me. I can't. Why? Because helping you isn't the same as saving you. He was silent. You've always saved me. I know. Why won't you now? Because you need to learn how to stand without me. He hung up. I didn't know whether he understood, but I knew I had finally said what needed to be said. 3 months later, the Hale Group entered restructuring. My father sold several properties. My mother moved out of the family estate. Adrian lost his position. None of it was dramatic. No police arrived. No courtroom scene. No humiliating spectacle. Just contracts, debt, consequences. People making decisions based on numbers rather than family names. I thought that would be the end. It wasn't. One morning, my assistant rushed into my office. "Ethan, there's something you need to see." She handed me a financial report. A former subsidiary of the Hale Group had been transferred years earlier. The transaction was suspicious. The buyer was a company connected to Adrian. My stomach tightened. It was the same scheme I remembered from my previous life. But there was a difference. This time, the transaction had been discovered before the company collapsed. The board had already launched an investigation. Adrian hadn't stolen everything, but he had concealed liabilities and redirected several contracts. The evidence was enough to destroy his reputation. I sat quietly. Mira watched me. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" I looked at the report. In my first life, I had died believing Adrian had gotten away with everything. This time, the truth had surfaced naturally. I didn't need to expose him. I didn't need to punish him. The world had simply stopped protecting him. That afternoon, my father called. His voice was barely audible. "Ethan." "Yes." "They found everything." "I know. I should have listened to you." I closed my eyes. "I never asked you to listen to me. You warned me." "No." I looked out at the city. "I tried to protect you." Silence. Then he whispered, "I know." For the first time, I heard regret in his voice. Not fear, not desperation, regret. And somehow, that was heavier. He asked to meet me. I agreed. But this time, I wasn't going back as the abandoned son. I was going as someone who no longer needed anything from him. My father chose a small cafe for our meeting. Not the family house. Not the headquarters. Not even a private restaurant. Just a quiet place on a side street where nobody would recognize us. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked at the empty chair across from him. "I didn't know where else to ask you to come." I sat down. "You could have called. I thought you'd ignore me." "I might have." He gave a faint, tired smile. "At least you're honest." A waiter brought coffee. Neither of us touched it. For several minutes, my father simply stared at his hands. Then he said, "Your grandfather knew me better than I knew myself." I waited. He once told me that if I ever had to choose between my children, I should make sure the choice didn't destroy the one I didn't choose. I looked at him. "You chose anyway." "Yes." His voice cracked. "I chose Adrian because I thought he needed me more." I said nothing. "I thought you were strong." "You use that word often." He looked up. "I know, but being strong doesn't mean you don't get hurt." His eyes filled with tears. "I know that now. That sentence would have meant everything to me years ago. Now it only made me sad." He reached into his coat and placed another envelope on the table. "This is yours." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "The remaining family trust." "I don't need it." "It isn't about need." "Then what is it about?" "Your grandfather wanted you to have it." I stared at the envelope. My grandfather, the only person in the family who had never asked me to become someone else. I finally picked it up. Inside were documents transferring the remaining assets to me. But there was also a handwritten note. "A family inheritance should never be a chain. Use it only if it gives you freedom." I smiled. That sounded exactly like him. My father watched me. "Will you forgive me?" I looked at him. "I already have." His shoulders dropped. Relief appeared on his face. Then I continued. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I can become your son in the same way again." His eyes lowered. "I understand." "No, Dad." He looked up. "I don't think you do." I took a breath. "I spent years believing that if I worked harder, you would eventually choose me. When you chose Adrian, I thought I wasn't good enough." He started to speak. I raised a hand. "Please let me finish." He nodded. "I spent another lifetime trying to prove I deserved your trust. I gave up opportunities, friends, relationships, my own health. Every time Adrian made a mistake, I cleaned it up. My voice remained calm. But when everything collapsed, I realized something." "What?" "You never actually needed me to be your son." He looked confused. "You needed me to be useful." The words landed heavily. He looked away. I continued. "And I accepted that because I confused being needed with being loved." My father covered his face. For a moment, I thought he might cry. He did, quietly. I didn't comfort him. Not because I was cruel, because this was something he had to feel. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were red. Is there nothing I can do? I thought about it. Be better to Adrian. He stared at me. He's the one who hurt you. I know, but after everything he did, he's still your son. My father looked stunned. I smiled faintly. I don't want him destroyed. Why? Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. I stood. I just don't want to lose myself again trying to save him. My father nodded slowly. As I walked away, he called my name. Ethan. I turned. I am proud of you. This time, I believed him. Not because I needed to, because I no longer did. Outside, the sky had started raining. I stood beneath the awning for a moment. Then someone held an umbrella over my head. I turned. Mira, you were supposed to be at the office, I said. I was. Then why are you here? You look like you might need someone to make sure you didn't walk home in the rain. I smiled. I can handle rain. I know. She tilted the umbrella. But you don't have to handle everything alone. Those words stayed with me. Because for years, I had believed independence meant needing nobody. Mira taught me something different. Independence meant choosing who you allowed close. Our relationship changed quietly after that. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden declaration, just small things. Mira remembered how I took my coffee. She knew when I was overworking. She challenged my decisions when everyone else agreed with me. And when North Star began preparing for a massive international expansion, she was the one person who asked me the question nobody else had. What do you actually want? I looked at her. From the company? From your life? I didn't have an answer. For the first time, that didn't frighten me. I want time. She smiled. For yourself? For people? She nodded. Good. So I changed. I stopped taking every business call after midnight. I started visiting my mother. I took weekends away from the office. I learned that a successful company could survive without its founders sitting in every meeting. North Star continued growing. We launched a new energy storage platform. Our technology was adopted by several major transportation networks. Then came the moment that changed everything. A global infrastructure fund offered to acquire a controlling stake in North Star. The offer was enormous. My board was excited. Mira wasn't. What are you thinking? She asked. I stared at the proposal. It's enough money to change all our lives. That's not what I asked. I smiled. You're becoming annoying. I've always been annoying. I closed the folder. No. She blinked. No. I won't sell control. Why? I thought of the family company. The crown. The inheritance. The way ownership had become a weapon. Because I don't want to build another place where people are afraid of losing power. So we negotiated a minority investment instead. North Star remained independent. Employees kept their shares. Our research division received more funding. And I finally understood what my grandfather meant. A crown wasn't something you wore. It was something people trusted you to carry. Meanwhile, Adrian's life was changing. The investigation into his financial decisions had ended. He was required to repay a portion of the funds and accept a settlement that removed him from corporate management. He didn't go to prison. He wasn't publicly humiliated. He simply lost the position he had once believed belonged to him. Months passed. Then I received a letter. No phone call. No messenger. Just a handwritten envelope. It was from Adrian. Ethan, I don't know if you'll read this. I spent years believing you were lucky because Dad trusted you. Then I thought you were weak because you kept forgiving me. I understand now that I had it backward. I stopped reading. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. Instead, I continued. He admitted to the debts, the lies, the hidden transactions. But the final paragraph was different. You were the person I trusted most, and I became the person you had the least reason to trust. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did. I folded the letter. Mira looked at me. You okay? Yes. Do you want to answer? I thought about it. Yes. My reply was short. I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't permission to return to my life the way things were. I hope you build something honest for yourself. Take care of Mom and Dad. I didn't sign anything else. I didn't need to. 2 months later, my mother invited me to dinner. Adrian was there. My father, too. The first few minutes were awkward. Nobody knew what to say. Then my mother placed food on the table. You still like this? I smiled. You've made it every birthday since I was 10. She laughed. You remember? Of course. That evening we talked. Not about business. Not about inheritance. Not about the past. We talked about ordinary things. My mother's garden. My father's health. Adrian's plans to start a small logistics consultancy. It wasn't the family I had once wanted. It was something smaller. Something imperfect. Something real. When I left, Adrian walked me to the door. Ethan. I turned. Thank you. For what? For not destroying me. I shook my head. I didn't save you. He looked confused. I just stopped trying to control what happened to you. He nodded slowly. I understand. As I walked toward my car, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for them to regret losing me anymore. They already had. And strangely, their regret didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. But I didn't know that my biggest test was still ahead. Because 3 weeks later, North Star received a letter from a government research agency. They wanted us to lead a national energy storage initiative. It would turn the company from a successful business into something much larger. And accepting it would force me to make a decision I had avoided my entire life. Whether I wanted to become the kind of leader my family had expected me to be, or the kind of leader I had chosen to become. The government proposal arrived in a black folder with no company logo on the outside. Inside was a project worth more money than any contract North Star had ever signed. The objective was simple: build a national energy storage network capable of supporting hospitals, transportation systems, emergency services, and remote communities during power shortages. The responsibility was enormous. So was the risk. If we failed, thousands of people could be affected. If we succeeded, North Star would become one of the most influential technology companies in the country. My board wanted an immediate answer. I asked for a week. Mira found me alone in the conference room that evening. You're hesitating? Yes. Why? I looked at the proposal. Because I know what happens when one person becomes responsible for everything. She understood immediately. Your family. My father thought leadership meant control. And you. I think leadership means building something that still works when you're gone. Mira smiled. Then maybe you're exactly the person they need. I accepted the contract, but I added one condition. North Star would not control the entire project. Universities, smaller engineering firms, and independent researchers would receive funding. The technology would be shared through a structured licensing system. When one board member objected, I told him, if this project belongs to one company, we've failed before we begin. The project lasted 2 years. There were setbacks. A manufacturing defect delayed production by 4 months. A major supplier went bankrupt. One prototype overheated during testing. The press called us reckless. Investors panicked. Our stock value dropped. For the first time since building North Star, I felt the old pressure returning. I stopped sleeping. I worked 14-hour days. Mira finally confronted me. You're doing it again. What? Trying to carry everyone. I stared at her. We're in trouble. Yes. We could lose the project. Yes. So I have to fix it. No. Her answer was firm. You have to lead it. I frowned. What's the difference? You don't personally repair every machine. You don't negotiate every contract. You don't approve every design. She stepped closer. You build a company. Now trust it. Her words reminded me of something. In my first life, I had tried to save the family business by becoming indispensable. That was the mistake. A healthy company shouldn't need one person to survive. So I changed our structure. I gave department heads real authority. I promoted engineers instead of executives. I created independent safety oversight. I stepped back, and slowly, the project recovered. 6 months later, the first completed energy storage network went online. The system powered a regional hospital through a major grid failure. No one at North Star celebrated loudly. We simply watched the hospital lights remain on. Mira stood beside me. You did it. I shook my head. We did. She smiled. That answer sounds better. That evening, I returned home earlier than usual. Mira was waiting outside my apartment. She held a small box. What is that? Open it. Inside was a simple silver watch. I stared at it. Why? You're always late. I laughed. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to. I looked at her. She became suddenly serious. You've spent years building a life where you don't need anyone. I waited. I want to be someone you choose anyway. My heart tightened. Mira, you don't have to answer tonight. I took her hand. I don't need time. She smiled. I choose you. There was no dramatic music. No perfect speech. Just two people standing beneath an apartment light, finally admitting what had already become obvious. For the first time, love didn't feel like something I had earned. It felt like something I could simply receive. A month later, my mother attended North Star's national project ceremony. She watched me on stage. When I stepped down, she hugged me. I wish your grandfather could see you. I smiled. He does. She laughed through tears. Then she whispered, your father watches every interview. I know. He's proud. I know. Would you invite him someday? I looked toward the stage. I might. That night, I called my father. He answered immediately. Ethan. Hi, Dad. There was silence. Then he said, I didn't expect you to call. I know. How are you? Good. Really? I smiled. Really? He breathed slowly. Your mother says you're happy. I am. That makes me happy. We spoke for nearly an hour. Not about business. Not about what he had done. Just life. Before hanging up, he said, I'd like to meet Mira. I laughed. She'll decide whether she likes you. For the first time in years, my father laughed too. The conversation ended peacefully. But peace wasn't the same as forgetting. I still remembered everything. I simply no longer lived inside those memories. Then, one morning, an unexpected announcement appeared across every major financial channel. North Star Dynamics, named among the world's fastest-growing independent technology companies. Our valuation had crossed a threshold nobody in my family had imagined when I walked away. My old family company, meanwhile, had been reduced to a fraction of its former size, and the media began comparing us. The Hale Group versus North Star. The old empire versus the new one. I hated the comparison, but there was nothing I could do about it, until my father called. His voice sounded different. Ethan. Yes. They want to buy us. Who? He paused. North Star. I stared at my phone. What? The board is considering selling the remaining logistics assets to your company. I closed my eyes. The past had found its way back to my door. The board meeting was held in the same building where my father had once announced Adrian as heir. This time, I walked into the room as the chairman of North Star. Nobody looked at me as the rejected son anymore. That was strangely uncomfortable. My father sat at the opposite end of the table. Adrian was there too. He looked thinner, older, but calmer. The board chairman stood. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. I nodded. Let's keep this simple. The remaining Hale Logistics division was profitable but underfunded. North Star could modernize it. The acquisition would preserve hundreds of jobs. But I refused to buy the company at an inflated price. I'll pay fair market value, I said. One director frowned. You could offer more. I could. Then why won't you? Because this isn't charity. My father watched me quietly. The director leaned forward. Your family built this business. I looked around the room, and I built mine. Silence. We're not here to settle old scores. I continued. We're here to decide whether two companies can create value together. The board eventually approved the deal, but I added another condition. My father would retain a small minority stake. Adrian would have no management position. The employees would receive protection against immediate layoffs, and the logistics division would operate independently for 5 years. My father signed. When the meeting ended, Adrian approached me. You really don't want the crown? I smiled. No. Why? Because I spent my first life chasing it. He looked at me. And it wasn't worth what it cost. He nodded. I used to think you were trying to beat me. I wasn't. I know that now. He looked through the glass wall toward the city. You built something bigger. I shook my head. That's not the point. What is? I looked at him. I built something that doesn't require me to hate you. He smiled sadly. That sounds like something grandfather would say. Probably. We stood there quietly. Then Adrian asked, Are we brothers again? I thought carefully. We're family. His eyes became wet. Is that enough? For now. He nodded. It was enough. Outside the building, Mira was waiting. How did it go? Better than expected. Did anyone punch anyone? No. Disappointing. I laughed. She slipped her hand into mine. As we walked toward the car, I looked back at the building. The place where I had once believed my future was decided. It no longer looked powerful. It looked small. Not because the building had changed, because I had. That night, I opened the old leather notebook I had kept since returning to my second life. The first page still contained the words, "I will not compete with you." I turned to the next page. Then I crossed out something I had written years earlier. "I will build something you cannot take from me." Underneath it, I wrote, "I built something I don't need anyone to approve of." Then I closed the notebook. Mira watched me. "What did you write?" I smiled. "Nothing important." She shook her head. "You've become impossible." "I know." She leaned against my shoulder. "Good." A year later, North Star's national energy project was completed. Millions of people benefited from the network. The company became a global leader. But the greatest change wasn't the valuation. It was the culture. People could disagree with me. They could leave. They could challenge me. They could build their own companies afterward. Nobody owed me loyalty because I had given them a job. I had learned that lesson the hard way. At the company's 10th anniversary celebration, my father attended. My mother sat beside him. Adrian stood with a small logistics firm he had built from scratch. He wasn't rich anymore, but he looked peaceful. Before the ceremony, my father approached me. "You've become a man your grandfather hoped you'd become." I smiled. "No." He looked confused. "I became the man I wanted to become." He nodded. Then he hugged me. For years, I had imagined that moment. In those fantasies, I would make him apologize. I would tell him everything he had done wrong. I would make him understand what he had lost. But when the moment finally came, I had no speech prepared. I simply hugged him back, because I no longer needed the apology to prove that I had been hurt. Afterward, I stepped onto the stage. Thousands of employees stood before me. Mira was in the front row. My parents sat behind her. Adrian stood beside them. I looked at the crowd. "This company began with a simple idea," I said. "That talent means nothing without trust." I paused. "And trust means nothing without freedom." The room became quiet. I once believed success meant becoming impossible to replace. I smiled. Now I believe success means building something that gives other people room to grow. The applause began slowly, then filled the hall. I looked at Mira. She smiled. And suddenly, I knew the story of my life had finally stopped being about my family. It was about what came after them. But there was still one final thing I had never done. I had never returned to my grandfather's old workshop, the place where he had taught me how to dream before I understood what dreams cost. So the next morning, I decided to go there. Alone. Or at least, that was what I thought. My grandfather's workshop had been closed for almost 15 years. The building stood at the edge of an old industrial district behind a rusted iron gate and a row of overgrown trees. I hadn't visited since I was a teenager. When I unlocked the door, the smell of dust, machine oil, and old wood filled the room. For a moment, I was 16 again. My grandfather was standing beside a workbench, holding a broken radio. "Everything has a reason," he had told me. "Even broken things? Especially broken things." I smiled at the memory. The workshop looked smaller now. There were shelves filled with mechanical parts, old notebooks, faded blueprints, and tools nobody had touched in years. I walked toward the workbench. A small wooden box sat underneath it. I recognized it immediately. My grandfather's handwriting was on the lid. "For Ethan." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. My grandfather and me. I was 17. He was laughing. I barely remembered the day. I turned the photograph over. There was a message. "Don't spend your life proving you deserve a place at the table. Build your own table. Then invite people worth having there." I sat down. For the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was unhappy, because I finally understood how much of my life had been shaped by a sentence I had never fully heard. I had spent my first life begging for a seat at my family's table. Then, after returning, I built an empire partly to prove they had been wrong. But somewhere along the way, that purpose had changed. North Star was no longer revenge. It was mine. My family was no longer my battlefield. It was simply part of my history. The workshop door opened behind me. I turned. Mira stood there. "You said you were coming alone." "I changed my mind." She smiled. "I figured." She walked over and sat beside me. What did you find? I handed her the photograph. She looked at it. He knew you. Better than anyone. She studied the message. He was right. About what? You built your own table. I laughed softly. It's a very expensive table. She smiled. Then I hope you have enough chairs. I looked at her. I do. She leaned against me. For several minutes, we sat in silence. Then she asked, do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't gone through all of this? I thought about the question. Yes. And I think I would have been successful. She smiled. That's a very confident answer. I was always capable. Were you? I nodded. But I wouldn't have known how to be happy. She looked at me. That's different. Very. That evening, we decided to restore the workshop. Not into another corporate office. Into a research and scholarship center. Every year, North Star would fund young engineers who couldn't afford advanced education. The first scholarship would carry my grandfather's name. When my father heard, he offered to contribute. I agreed. Adrian did too. Not because we had suddenly become inseparable. Because some things were worth rebuilding slowly. Months later, the center opened. My mother cut the ribbon. My father stood beside her. Adrian helped one of the students assemble a small robotic arm. Mira was beside me. The room was full of young people who had no idea how much that place meant to me. One student approached. Mr. Hale? Yes. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you know you would succeed? I smiled. I didn't. He looked surprised. Then why did you keep going? I glanced around the room. At some point, I stopped trying to prove I could win. I paused. I wanted to build something worth finishing. He nodded. Thank you. As he walked away, Mira whispered, that was almost inspirational. Almost. Don't get carried away. I laughed. Later that evening, I stood outside the workshop with my father. The sun was setting. He looked at the restored building. Your grandfather would have loved this. I think so. He hesitated. Ethan. Yes. Do you think we can ever be close again? I looked at him. It was the question he had been afraid to ask for years. I don't know. He nodded. But I want to try. I smiled. So do I. That was enough. Not a perfect reunion. Not a magical repair. Just two people willing to start again without pretending the past hadn't happened. 3 years passed. North Star became one of the world's leading energy technology companies. The Hale Group survived too, though it was much smaller than the empire my grandfather had built. Adrian's logistics consultancy became profitable. My parents retired, and the old family house was eventually sold. Nobody treated it like a tragedy. It was simply a house. The past had stopped owning us. Mira and I married quietly. There were no corporate sponsors, no reporters, just family, close friends, and a handful of people who had believed in us when North Star was still a rented room above a repair shop. At the reception, my mother gave a speech. She cried halfway through it. I spent many years thinking Ethan was the strongest person in our family because he never complained. She looked at me. I was wrong. The room became silent. He was strong because he finally learned that he didn't have to carry everyone. I squeezed Myra's hand. My mother smiled through her tears. And because he learned that being loved should never require you to disappear. I looked down. For years, I had imagined hearing my mother say those words. When she finally did, they didn't feel like an apology. They felt like recognition. Later that night, my father approached me. He handed me a small envelope. I opened it. Inside was the photograph from my grandfather's workshop, the same one I'd found years earlier. You keep it, I said. He shook his head. I think he wanted you to have it. I smiled. I already do. My father looked confused. I tapped my chest. Here. He understood. Then he hugged me. This time, neither of us needed to say anything. Across the room, Adrian was talking to Mira. When he noticed me watching, he walked over. You know, he said, I used to think you won because you became richer than all of us. I smiled. And now? Now I think you won because you stopped caring whether we thought you won. I laughed. That sounds annoyingly wise. Don't tell anyone. We shook hands. Then he hugged me. It was brief. Awkward. Real. After everyone left, Mira and I stood outside. The city lights stretched into the distance. She rested her head on my shoulder. Are you happy? I looked at her. Yes. Really, really. She smiled. What changed? I thought about the answer. Not the company, not the money, not the crown. The answer was much simpler. I stopped waiting for my family to tell me who I was. She looked up at me. And who are you? I smiled, still figuring that out. She laughed. Good answer. I looked toward the skyline. Years ago, I had stood in a ruined office watching my first life disappear. I had believed losing my family's approval meant losing everything. I had been wrong. When I returned, I thought my greatest advantage was knowing what would happen. It wasn't. The real gift was knowing what I no longer wanted. I didn't want their crown. I didn't want their approval. I didn't want to destroy Adrian. I didn't want my father to suffer. I didn't even want them to regret me anymore. I wanted freedom. And once I had it, I discovered something I had never understood before. Walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the first decision I had ever made entirely for myself. I had entered my second life, believing I needed to build an empire beyond my family's reach. I did, but the empire wasn't the victory. The victory was waking up every morning without asking whether the people who once rejected me were proud. The victory was being able to love without fear of losing myself. The victory was building a company where people could disagree with me and still feel safe. The victory was sitting beside my wife under the same night sky that had once watched me leave my family behind. And most of all, the victory was finally understanding my grandfather's words. You don't need a crown to prove you're valuable. You need the courage to build a life that belongs to you. I looked at Mira. Ready to go home? She smiled. Which one? I laughed. For a moment, I thought about the old family mansion, the boardroom, the crown, the inheritance, the years I'd spent believing those things were my destiny. Then I looked at the woman beside me, at the company we had built, at the scholarship center bearing my grandfather's name, at the future waiting beyond the city lights. Home, I said, is wherever we choose. And this time, I knew exactly what I meant. I didn't leave my family because I hated them. I left because I finally understood that love without boundaries becomes another kind of prison. I forgave them. I remembered them. I even made room for them in my life again. But I never returned to the person they had once expected me to be. That person had spent a lifetime waiting to be chosen. I became someone who could choose himself. And that was the empire no one could ever take from me.